Hello, and welcome to another edition of Lifting Lowdown, the bi-weekly industry podcast brought to you by Lift Hoist International. My name is Guy Harris, and I'm the publisher of LHI, the magazine servicing the global industrial lifting sector. Listeners will know that this podcast does not take the format of a straightforward interview, but invites industry representatives and key players to openly discuss topics in a relaxed and friendly manner. In this episode, we'll be deliberating the responsibilities a large manufacturer has to its industry. Manufacturers and suppliers play a hugely important role at every stage of the product life cycle, from sourcing raw materials to helping ramp up production. As a market becomes saturated, manufacturers need to work closely with their staff, suppliers, and customers to get the best from their products. Do major producers of equipment have increased responsibilities, such as manufacturing standards, serving as industry ambassadors over smaller competitive companies? To discuss these questions and more, I am joined by John Backus of the Crosby Group and Richard Howes from Bridger Howes. John is the Senior Vice President of North America for the Crosby Group, overseeing all commercial operations in the US and Canada. He has spent 15 years in various manufacturing companies, from food and agriculture to industrial equipment. John's passion is being a change agent and looks to provide value to shareholders and customers alike. John's educational background includes a Bachelor of Science degree in Industrial Engineering, graduate studies in Accounting and Finance, and he even holds a Six Sigma Black Belt. As ever, I am joined by my regular cohort, Richard Howes. Rich is a director of niche PR consultancy Bridger Howes. Having specialised in the lifting and materials handling sectors for more than 15 years, he brings a wealth of industry experience to the table. Gentlemen, good afternoon or good morning, John, and welcome to Lifting Lowdown.
Thank you for having me, Guy and Rich. I'm looking forward to it. Good afternoon to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Good to be back. Good to have John with us, and excited to get into another one of these.
Absolutely, and we have to say thanks for joining us today, John, on what is the US, the day of the election, of course.
Yeah. No problem.
It's a busy day for all your fellow countrymen. I'm guessing you've been to the polling station already, have you?
Yep. I've been, as they say, vote early and vote often in some precincts. So that is out of the way for me, at least.
Well, outstanding, and I think we're all, the entire world, sitting with bated breath to see the outcome of this particular election. So anyway, without further ado, let's move on and let's go straight into it. So, John, one for you, please. Crosby has been a trusted brand for more than 130 years. Do all at Crosby feel the pressure to increase standards across the board? Is that something that's integral and part of the company's culture?
Yeah, I would say so. And, obviously in this time of COVID, and particularly in 2020 and probably going into 2021, we will see kind of an increase in standards, I think, happening from our perspective as a large manufacturer. We'll see increase in standards, I think, both occurring within our plants and then what I would say are commercial and society, classifications and standards that will also be increasing as well for a couple different points. One, internally, it's interesting that in this period that we're in, manufacturing companies that I think have been successful in mitigating the risk with COVID are now going to the CDC and other health organizations around the world and in their local communities and looking at what type of regulations and, I would say, specific things that they need to put in place to mitigate the risk of COVID and almost treating it like a safety incident. We're starting to use, strange vernacular, which is, we've gone so many days without, a positive case of COVID or an outbreak, which is typically how you think of people talking about safety. And then, so that's pretty internal with standards. I think externally, we're going to see, quite a bit of standards and maybe even some new societies come into play as well, relating to COVID. People are going to try to diversify, right? I think our industry in lifting and rigging is heavily indexed towards oil and gas. And that industry has definitely been probably one of the most decimated. You don't have as many airplanes in the air, you don't have many people driving, right? The prices crashed, and for a short period, was trading at a negative price this year. So I think you're going to see a lot of companies in the lifting and rigging space try to find other areas where they maybe have not been successful, like renewables. There's a huge push, particularly in North America, on the wind industry, both offshore and land-based. And I think that you're going to see different societies, challenge each other for who's got jurisdiction over, what safe practices are, or what manufacturers' recommendations are. And it'll be interesting to see how that develops over the course of the next few months and into 2021.
And is that a top-down culture, do you feel, at Crosby Group in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to increasing, I'd say our standards and really kind of globally looking at best practices, it has to be driven from the top. And our CEO has challenged all of us to think more holistically about how we run our business better, how we take, all sorts of new data, into consideration when we're, either looking at how do we run our plants and how do we do so safely and how do we do so efficiently. And then how do we do so, externally for our customers? What are things that we can do to improve there? So that it's a continuous improvement culture that has to be pushed from the top down. We meet almost weekly, as a senior leadership team, and then, the local sites, the manufacturing sites, the local sales organizations are doing so as well to talk about these best practices.
Can I just to give listeners a sense of scale here, John? You've referenced kind of the manufacturing capability of the business there, etc. But what kind of scale are we talking about? We're talking about 30 global sites and a regional distributor network of multiple thousands. Am I right on both counts?
Yeah, absolutely, Rich. So, if you look at our Crosby footprint globally, we've got over 25 manufacturing and distribution sites, and those are located all over the globe in North America and Europe, and Australia, South America. We just have, we're quite lucky and thankful to have, I think, the network of manufacturing and distribution sites that we have, as that enables us, particularly in this challenging market where people are taking inventories down and customers have what I would say are faster needs as they're financially strapped. That footprint allows us to deliver just, I think, at a very aggressive and fast pace all over the world. And you're correct on the number of distributors. We're also grateful for our distribution network, which is about 2,000 plus globally. And without them and the hard work that they do, it would be difficult to service the end users that we have all over the world with rigging and lifting product as easily as what we do.
Okay, now it's interesting because we've had probably 10, 12 guests on this podcast so far. And I think probably, John, you're representative of a global scale there that's different to the guests we've had so far. So I just wanted to press you on that scale. So I think one of the things that you probably would hope we'd get to, John, is the vertical integration of that operation from a manufacturing standpoint. Can you just tell us a little bit about that and why a marketplace might benefit from such a model? Yeah,
that's an interesting question. Vertical integration is a thing that, isn't really clearly defined except for in supply chain courses and how people like to, market themselves as businesses. But the way that Crosby thinks about vertical integration is that, we look at what type of materials are we sourcing, how are we transforming those materials, and then how do they get to our customers, our distribution network, and our end users. And we kind of look at the scale and we say, well, how much transformation are we doing? And we at Crosby view our transformation of product as pretty vertically integrated. We're sourcing steel, in some cases directly from a mill that is then being forged and machined and painted and heat treated, in various different operations into the rigging equipment that you'll see us providing. And so if you take into consideration, not many companies are manufacturing product that also own a steel mill. So we think that our vertical integration is probably one of the highest in the industry. That allows us, the Crosby Group, to have just, an immense amount of control all the way from the beginning of the product, coming in, the quality inspection, the test certificates that we get from our raw materials, all the way through the transformation and quality control and manufacturing processes that we have of that material that ends up turning into finished goods that people use. So, if an end user has a problem or a distributor has a problem, we very quickly, with our own eyes and ears, can get our hands on, what was the root cause? How did this happen? Where do we need to hold accountability? And I think accountability is a big part of, vertical integration as well. You'll see some companies that, I think you've referred to it in the past, Rich, is kind of just rebadging product. They'll buy it, they'll brand it under their name, and then they'll distribute it. And that is probably an example of a very low level of vertical integration. And where in that case, if a customer has an issue or has a question, with that low vertical integrated company, it's very hard for them to get details or to troubleshoot issues that they may be having, because that company that rebadged or rebranded it, has to go through 3 or 4 different parties to root cause and figure out what happens.
I wonder, therefore, John, if actually the vertical integration, therefore, the awareness of it must get less as you go down a supply chain, and until there's a reason to look into it and track a product. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think that's a fair comment. The awareness of the product, the commodity, what it's being used for, how it's being transformed, maybe even, certain properties of it that are important to end users, and for, the ultimate, manufacturing of a product will get less and less the further you go down in a less vertically integrated supply chain.
Okay. Yeah, no, it's an interesting one, because I know that, when we're on social media and we kind of talking about things, very often you kind of find yourself referring to accidents that have happened and things like that. And I often wonder, when you see these certain components that there's been an issue with, I just wonder how on earth do people go about tracing the origins of these things, particularly when you're talking about distributor networks and end users, and simply just disconnects within supply chains. So it's interesting to kind of hear. I suppose at Crosby, you'd be confident nearly all of the time that you've got a complete traceability to that point of use.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Rich. If you think about an end user who's using, a large hook or a block, or a set of shackles, or a part of a whole, lifting or rigging system, or some sort of sling assembly, you are typically doing overhead lifting where people's lives are at stake, property damage and project timeliness are at stake, and ultimately, when we put product out in the market for use for those end users, we want to have 100% assurance, over 100% assurance that those products can perform, as expected, as advertised, and well above and beyond the needs of our end users. And I kind of put myself in maybe a less vertically integrated company's shoes, and I wonder, how do they sleep at night? Not being able to know, the depth of their supply chain and have control over that. Because like I said, if there's a problem, it's very difficult to trace that back. And if you're going through multiple, it ends up becoming a finger pointing contest. I think, if an end user has an accident and they're trying to figure out what happened, and they're going to someone who's not as vertically integrated as Crosby, it's very difficult, I think, to get good, straight answers. And a lot of times with the accidents, I think that we've seen recently, it's a bit of a blame game. Well, we didn't manufacture it, we did the engineering for it, or, we didn't do that process. And I think those are things that are being said behind closed doors. But, as a highly vertically integrated company, we tend to pick, projects and products where, we really add an immense amount of value, because if we don't think that that's part of the Crosby DNA. And it's not something that we sleep well with at night.
Well, there's the product, isn't there? And then there's the usage, of course, the application. Then there's the training. And Crosby introduced training courses back in the 1980s. Is that right, John?
Yep, that's correct.
So you offer rigging courses, for example, in ASME and OSHA, land-based energy and offshore energy. How much importance do you place on these courses for end users of your equipment? And do you see this as a staple requirement of a leading manufacturer?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Guy. I think a lot of our peers probably don't think of training as a requirement. And the reason that it's important for Crosby, and we feel that it's good, for us as a manufacturer and a staple for what we do, is, being able to train not just our distribution network on proper application or usage or product selection, but also end users, on the same types of subjects, allows us to have a pulse on what end users are doing in the industry. So it allows us to see how rigging is being used. It allows us to see, what type of products they're using and what types of applications. And then we can also take that information back and say, well, how do we make what we do better? Is there a product gap that we have that we need to address? Is there an improvement that we need to make on existing products? Or is there just, training that we need to go back and look at and reinforce? And so, they say that the best way to test your knowledge of something is to go out and become the teacher, right? And I think that is something that Crosby values very highly, is that if we're out in the market and we're training in front of end users, I think that gives them faith in us, that one, we can do that training well, but also gives them faith in us as a manufacturer, because we're able to talk shop and, speak to their specific needs and their specific use cases for product. And I think that just is an invaluable component of what we do at Crosby. And you look, there are a lot of people in our network that just focus on training. They go out and that is their trade. And I think that's excellent. And those are great partners. But they look at it, a bit as, their business. They're in it to make money, right? Whereas, I think Crosby, and maybe I shouldn't say this, is a bit more altruistic in our view of training, right? We really look at it as a form of stewardship to the industry. Why not take the knowledge that we have about manufacturing and, making great equipment and how that equipment performs in the field, and then, translating that to training with end users that I think just makes everybody safe throughout the entire value chain in the lifting and rigging industry.
Well, that's interesting to hear and reassuring, because that's kind of what I was getting at. I wondered if you felt it was almost like a staple requirement of a leading manufacturer such as yourselves to give back to the industry, not just to really guide people through the usage process of your equipment, but you're also saying that there's a two-way, it's almost like a two-way conduit there. You're getting intel back from your end users, which you can then feed back to R&D and make your products even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't want to overplay that hand either. I mean, I don't think anybody in the rigging and lifting space has become Google yet with data analytics, but there are a few companies that I think are trying to penetrate that. But, so it's a bit more of an art, I think, for us, and a science, in terms of capturing that feedback and looking at that. But, the same people, that are out in the spaces, training end users, getting out on job sites, inspecting equipment, are the same people that we've got in discussions, around product development, or, engineering projects that we could do to manufacture, our products, more efficiently, or make them more efficient for end users' use. So, yeah, I mean, it is definitely a two-way street, and I think that's something that we're pretty transparent about.
Outstanding.
How do you position and pitch yourselves, John, when you're in the marketplace? Because I'm just trying to get a sense to what extent are you always a lifting and rigging hardware manufacturer versus a component manufacturer within an end user marketplace? So say you went into wind energy or aquaculture or something like that. What hat are you wearing? Are you Crosby the lifting and rigging guys, or are you component experts in those end user markets? And how do you, and I'm assuming you have, I know in a number of cases you have individuals that sit at the top of those markets, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good question. I think the hat that we try to wear when we go in to, speak with end users about our product is we try to go in as the trusted rigging expert, right? So less of a kind of a training entity, less of a component manufacturer, but more as, let us help you solve the problem that you have in front of you when it comes to lifting and rigging, right? And we've got a number of different attack angles. We can do that from a training perspective, which we think gets people to think about Crosby top of mind when they go for equipment selection. We do it with our distribution network. So like you mentioned, we've got over, 2,000 sites globally that are, proud Crosby distributors. And it's just an amazing network to pull from and have in the field and have, touching and seeing end users every day. And then we look at it as so the other part of that is we're also the trusted manufacturer, right? So if we've got a good network, we know the trade and we know the space well, then I think it's an easy leap to think of Crosby as a good manufacturer. And with the heritage and the history and the level of vertical integration that we have, that's not really, I think, a tough sell for us. And I've got to mention too, when you look globally at whether you're in the United States or Canada or the UK or in China, our boots on the ground salespeople have, I think, are pretty homogenous when you think about their skill set. I mean, these are people that are trusted rigging experts themselves, right? Most of them have some certification as a trainer. They're out doing end user training. They're out doing distributor training. And that's something that we think, the end markets value pretty significantly when you look at, what do we do in this space? So yeah, we don't think of ourselves certainly as a component manufacturer. We try to espouse ourselves as the lifting and rigging experts. And if you know an expert that's good at something that you're not, hopefully, or something that you need help in developing a skill set around as an end user, then the hope and the play there is that they go to Crosby first.
Got you.
Okay. It's interesting because, and I'll just refer back to the point I made earlier, just about the sense of scale with Crosby versus kind of a lot of other players in the marketplace. So, just to change direction, then, John, if we can, how would you advise or incentivize someone? Perhaps we've covered a lot on this podcast about recruitment and young people and promoting our industry and that kind of thing. So what extent would you encourage someone to look to seek employment at a global operation of the scale of Crosby versus their local kind of lifting and rigging shop? What opportunities and, if you will, challenges does it present?
Yeah. That's a challenge that I think a lot of people in our industry, no matter where you are at in the supply chain, whether you're a value-added fabricator, who's making slings and other equipment, or whether you're a component manufacturer or distributor, that's something that, other than COVID, is probably one of the hottest topics, out there, I think, in our space, and it's a really interesting challenge. I think the way that we approach it is, I think we have to look at it as a market, right? So I don't look at it as what does Crosby need to do to differentiate ourselves from, say, somebody who's manufacturing slings or somebody who's making, lifting beams or somebody else in our industry. I think the way that we try to approach it is how do we just generally get people into our space and interested in this? And I think it's like any other trade, right? But it's one that I think is not thought of often. You can say, hey, I can become an electrician, or I can become a carpenter, or I can become a plumber, and those are trades that are well known, but not a lot of people think about, well, I want to become an expert in rigging and lifting. And so I think that's the thing that we have to promote, is that anytime there is construction, groundbreaking, movement taking place, transportation, lifting and rigging is there, and it's a very exciting space. I myself have only been in the industry, almost 4 years. And, within 20 minutes talking to some of the industry vets who've been at 20, 30, 40 years, right, they can quickly, I think, enchant someone around the stories of, the things that they've lifted, the things that they've moved, the projects that they've been on. And I think that's what we have to do more of, is just, a bit more self-promotion. And that comes, I think, at a very, early in career attack vector. We've worked with some large engineering construction companies to partner on training college interns. So there was a company we partnered with where we provided some training to over 500 college interns, and it was co-branded with that group. So Crosby and the other brand. And we were able, I think, to sway a lot of people to think about this as an industry to get involved in. Now that was kind of this is the first year that we've done something like that, but that's where you have to focus is who are the people that are coming out of, high school or college, or, vocational activities, and how do we get out in the community and engage with those people and show them what a noble service, our industry can do. And again, I don't think it's about differentiating Crosby from, other component manufacturers or from, our other partners. I think it's about how do we do it together. And I think the attack vector is, getting people very early on in their career from multiple different career paths, whether it's, engineers or, whether it's people looking to go into more, vocational activities. We've got to be there because a lot of other industries and a lot of other trades are there, and it's a non-negotiable, I think, for us to continue to bring new talent in.
That's really encouraging to hear, John. We've spoken about this subject on numerous occasions, haven't we, Rich, on Lifting Lowdown? Lift Hoist International is part of a drive working alongside Leah to encourage young people to enter the lifting sector. Something you said about the history and the heritage that Crosby has, it must weigh heavy on you guys. But just to reiterate, you feel that the major manufacturers such as yourselves do have a duty of care to really support and induce people to come into this sector. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely, Guy. I mean, it's like I said, I want to bring as many people into the pool as possible for talent. So again, I don't think we differentiate or try to steal from others, but just try to get as many in as possible. And I think with, a name like Crosby, a 600-700 page Crosby catalog, on an engineer's desk or, in a vocational school, are things that go a long way, but it's that story, right? It's engaging with those people, with those that have been in the industry for a while, are in the industry for a while, and encourage people to have similar experiences. And with the amount of experience that we've got at Crosby, I think it is certainly a duty for us as a large manufacturer to bring as many people under the tent as possible.
So does that tie in with other Crosby ethics, for example, sort of after-sales service, R&D, product design, investment? For example, where do you stand on corporate social responsibility? All of these things are engaging to young people looking to possibly join this industry.
Yeah. So, obviously, one of the things that is in our mission statement, or, in our corporate responsibility that we state, very upfront, is, the number one thing that we are focused on is safety, right? And with that, safety has to be pervasive, not just in the products that we sell, right? Safely performing their job, safely being selected, safely being used, right? And we think that we're a good partner in ushering that from an end user perspective with the training that we do. But safety also has to be pervasive in, what we do internally for how we manufacture the product, right? When we talked about COVID, right, that COVID has become synonymous with safety for us now, right? Sure. And I think what you're going to see into 2021 and 2022 and beyond, there is a tremendous amount that we have learned about the health and safety of our workforce, about how to keep people safer, with social distancing, how to keep people safer, with just good, hygiene and general practices. And that is something that we're trying to think about maturing, beyond just the current pandemic, and what do those best practices actually remain? Because if it drives the flu down some percentage points, right, that keeps, your workers and employees safe, it keeps their families safe. It keeps the business going and operating optimally, and those are all good things for, I would say, corporate responsibility in the public, in the public space. And I hope that answered your question, Guy.
No, it does, and it's probably worth pointing out that you were very much involved with the first aid effort, weren't you? Back in sort of late March, early April. Is that right? Crosby as a group, I mean.
Yeah. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit, Guy.
Well,
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
In our May edition, for example, I think Crosby worked very closely with the aid ship with medical supplies and everything for the first wave of COVID that the United States
Yeah,
experienced.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was very early on in March, and I think that this will ring true for a lot of, hopefully, listeners of the podcast, and I know it certainly does for Rich. We talked about it, but I think a lot of people in our industry are going to remember ConExpo 2020, right, as a very kind of critical pivot point
Yes.
for us, right?
I wasn't
and I
there,
would
but
say,
Rich was.
right. Yeah, I know Rich was. And so I think this is a good story, right? It was probably three to 4 weeks before ConExpo where, I think what was going on with COVID-19 was really starting to hit kind of, I would say, global recognition of this being a potential huge problem. And so, Crosby at the time, started to think through, what do we need to do if this hits us? And that started at the top. That started with our CEO, Robert Dessel, right? And he challenged us as a leadership team to think about, what do we do in every facet of our organization to prepare for something that could be, a worst case scenario in terms of an illness and transmission. There was a lot of things that we didn't know. So, about 3 to 4 weeks prior to COVID, we were already putting plans together for what type of, safety equipment do we need? What are the organizations that we need to be watching, like in the US, the CDC for, guidelines and how to prevent, and, what are the things that we need to do to prepare ourselves in the plants? What are the things that we need to do to prepare ourselves in the offices that we run, and the distribution centers, and with our customers and end users? So, prior to ConExpo, we had some plans on paper, and, the best laid plan never survives the first encounter with the enemy, right? And I think, as we learned, that those plans and those standards changed, right? And they'll probably continue to do that, and you have to adapt. I mean, it seems like it's every couple of weeks we've got health organizations are suggesting new ways to deal with this. So, you've kind of got that planning that's taking place, and then leading up to ConExpo, I think, particularly for North America and probably in Europe, that seemed like that's where the powder keg blew up, right? And for our industry, I think a lot of people were looking at ConExpo in the days leading up to it. Is it going to get canceled? Is it going to get canceled? There was a lot of, press going on. There was a daily update. I think of a couple of different websites and publications saying, here's who's dropped out of ConExpo today. And you've got the ConExpo promoters saying, no, hey, we're still going. Yeah. And it's tough. Like, hindsight, I don't think that there was any significant transmission, or maybe even any transmission, of COVID-19 from that event. But obviously it marked, I think, a turning point for our industry where, trade shows just stopped. And that's an important way for everyone to engage with customers, learn about new products, meet and see people that you haven't got to see in the industry for a while. And it's also a way to recruit folks, like we talked about, right? ConExpo is a great place to pick up a bunch of, college and high school kids and drag them along to go see some really cool equipment. Sure. And that's something I think is an industry that we're missing out on, for all the right reasons, with respect to the current pandemic. But I felt like we were on the cutting edge of what to do, and it certainly wasn't without a lot of missteps. Like I said, you had recommendations changing every day. You had recommendations changing today. It's an immense amount of data and insight to kind of take in. And I think Crosby, just at Robert's leadership and all the way down to everyone on the plant floor to customer service people, have changed the way that they work, and have really, I think, adapted and adopted a whole new way of doing business. And hopefully we come out at the end of this safer and stronger, and have taken our key learnings and implemented them in a way that's good for all.
Agreed. I mean, I see that happening within so many companies at the moment. It's been going on for several months, and I unfortunately see it happening for many more to come. Rich, we've got to start winding things down, but I can see that you want to come in with something here, buddy.
Yeah, so you mentioned, John, the top-down culture at the company and the importance of those messages kind of coming from the top. How on earth do you maintain that with respect to COVID, given that every geography is kind of in such a different place?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think people might look at a company like Crosby with the global scale that we have, and certainly there's larger companies even, outside of our industry, that you would look at that and say, gosh, you're in so many different countries, you've got so many different sites and so many different people kind of leading groups. How do you manage that? And I'd actually say that scale for us has been a benefit. And so, like I said, it starts at the top down. We're meeting, weekly at least, when it comes to what's going on in our plants, what's going on in our communities, what's going on, in the field with our end users and our distributors. It relates to COVID. And as we do those things, we meet as a global leadership team to talk about what best practices we've learned. So while Belgium may have some rules locally that look a lot different than what they do, say, in the U.S., but if Belgium said, hey, we've implemented this thing, and it's been really great for contract tracing, or the United States comes back and says, hey, we've really been able to accommodate some of our manufacturing workspaces, and here's a cell layout that's worked really well. It's been a really good, wide net to cast to get those best practices, and then kind of chew on them, digest them, and say, hey, does this to do globally? And if it does, make a very quick decision to roll something out globally and accept it. So, it's almost like a constant feedback loop, right? As a leadership team, you say, what's the current status, what's working, what's not working, what's changed. And as you start to answer those questions and think through things, you hear something that someone else has said that's like, gosh, that's really great. That if that helps limit exposure, or is a really great way to engage customers in a safe way, then maybe we should be doing that in our region. And then you go take that back and you go implement it. So, I think our scale has been good, but I would say that our kind of speed to manage that has been better. And I think it has to become muscle memory, right? You got to say, we're going to meet, we're going to discuss this. Here are the things that we're going to measure. Here are the things that we're going to do. And this is how we're going to, this is what I expect, the expectations are to come back in a week and talk about the outcomes of those changes. And I think if you do that and can do it periodically, and develop, like I said, muscle memory around it, scale actually really is a benefit in that type of environment.
Last response, Rich?
Yeah, no, look, it's just interesting. And I think that's what's been fascinating about John's perspective here is that sense of scale. And it's interesting just to get an appreciation of how that kind of helps and hinders an operation, really. I mean, those comments about ConExpo bring back some serious memories. That's the last time I saw a hotel, an aeroplane, and it's just even that reminder, just in the content and marketing space, it's just been unbelievable how we've kind of adapted over the last 8 months without, as John says, that those trade shows were focal points, weren't they? They were like, we used to plan for them for 6 months at a time, somewhat longer. And
Sure.
At the moment, even the ones I have got in my diary in months' time, I'm not even confident they're going to happen. So it completely transformed the way that we're working with our clients, and no doubt that John and Crosby are trying to engage with their audiences. And yeah, it's going to be unbelievable that we're going to almost certainly do a complete year and a full annual cycle in between trade shows and face-to-face engagement, aren't we? It's unbelievable. I mean, what are you doing, Guy? Are you planning to be present anywhere as a magazine next year? Are you resigned to the fact that you're not? How are you planning for it?
That's a very good question. I was just going over our 2021 media kit last night because rather bullishly we put all of these shows in our calendar and promoting our presence at these shows. But of course, many of these now won't be going ahead. They've been forced to make a decision. For example, the ARA show, which is the American Rental Association's event, that's not going ahead in 2021. And in fact, because it's at the beginning of the year, they've decided not to go ahead until 2023, I believe. So that's 2 years of that particular show, which is a major industry event for that sector, isn't going ahead. Logimat is another one, which you'll all be familiar with, or Logimat, that isn't going ahead in March as planned. that's now taking place, I believe, in June. Let's wait and see. Hopefully it will go ahead. And of course, ProMat. We're all waiting on ProMat. And that decision is taking place, I think, in mid-December as to whether that's going ahead. So there's a big question mark over that one as well. So all of these massive industry events that we catch up at and we all look forward to, individual organizations, whether it's meeting and greeting, selling equipment, learning, experience, the whole gamut, they're all under threat at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, and I think we're still learning, I think, how we're going to position ourselves remotely. I've not seen any real good substitute yet. I've participated in a couple of sort of online conferences and they haven't quite pitched it right, I don't think, between webinar and virtual.
Yeah.
It's kind of not done either that well. But I think as a sector, we're going to have to get better than that. But what are the marketing guys telling you, John? Are they factoring in a presence at events? Are they hedging their bets? Have they written off 2021? What's the message from the marketing guys where you are?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we've written off 2021 yet, but as you guys alluded to, it's just exceptionally difficult to kind of forecast because, it seems like in most events these days, they're waiting, I don't want to say to the last minute, but, you've got kind of a good mix of, I'm going to delay it for a couple of years, or, I might tell you a couple months in advance, what the plan is. But I would say that, for CROSBY Marketing, and they have just done a tremendous job. And to give a little bit of a pitch here, some might have seen, the Crosby Ask the Expert series, which was something that we started to publish during COVID because, we had resources, time, and people available, to put together what I thought was some really great content to reach end users. And we've just learned a tremendous amount from that about, how people, digest and take in that content during this time, how helpful that was for some. And, we've developed, I think, a repository of really quick tidbits of nice, really good information for, people who are doing lifting and rigging that wasn't out there before. But, those are great things to learn. And I think those are things that, we as an industry have to find, places to do things differently that are impactful. AWARF, American Wire Rope Fabricators, did a virtual, pie where, you look at, new products or, different type of product information or engineering, feats that are going on. And they just did a tremendous job. I think with all the AWARF, the people that are involved with AWARF and the distributors and manufacturers, and used it kind of as a time to, really quick 20-minute tidbits for what each company had going on and new products and technology that was out there, and it was amazing. It was really good. That though doesn't substitute the in-person experience that I think that you get. So hopefully on the back end of all this, and this is how I think our marketing team thinks about it, is don't write off the future and don't think that we won't get to a place where some of these trade shows are taking place and let's be ready for it. But also let's take what we've learned and build that into our DNA and continue it. And, at the end of this, I think we'll all be tremendously better. We just can't wait to see each other live and in person every once in a while. So that's the hard part of all of this.
Agreed, John. And I think that brings us back very nicely to the overriding theme of this podcast, and that's responsibility. And, I agree with you. I hope some of these shows do take place, of course, and we do find ourselves meeting up, whether it's stateside or in Europe somewhere or further afield indeed. But in the meantime, we all have a responsibility to really engage with our end users. In the case of LHI, it's readers. In the case of Lifting Lowdown, it's listeners, and really just impart information and keep that dialogue going, really. And in the case of your videos that you've been doing online, for example, teaching people, imparting that knowledge that 130 years of history and culture has brought with it. Look, guys, I can't thank you enough. Sadly, we're going to have to wrap it up, I'm afraid. We are at the end of yet another episode, but I think it's raised just as many questions as answers have been answered. So maybe you wouldn't mind coming on another time, John. We'd certainly love to have you.
No, absolutely. Anytime, Guy and Rich. And I just want to say thank you for having me on. And this has been an excellent discussion. And good discussions lead to more questions than they do answers sometimes. So we're happy to pick this up.
Indeed. Well, let's look for 2.0 somewhere down the line. And thanks again for joining us on this monumental day for the American people. And good luck. And look forward
Yep.
to speaking to you both soon. Many thanks.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Guy. Appreciate it. It's been
Cheers,
good.
Rich.
Yeah,
Thanks, mate.
Yeah.
All the best, chaps. Thanks now. Bye-bye.
All right.
At the time of editing this programme, vote counting was still taking place in key states and the outcome of the US presidential election was unclear. As with the pandemic being a political battleground, it is also an ongoing threat to nearly all industries, including ours, despite the often essential status we are given and the nature of what we provide and do. Are situations such as this exactly the time for us to uphold standards and seek out new opportunities? Is that all of our responsibility and not just that of our industry bellwethers? As I meant to say, I think this podcast may have thrown up more questions than answers, but hopefully offered some meaningful insights too. As ever, thank you for listening and feel free to leave comments or present any questions for me and our guests. Your feedback and suggestions for future editions will enable us to make this podcast even more relevant and interesting. You can keep up to date with the latest industry news by visiting LHI's website liftandhoist.com. Thank you for listening and look out for the next episode in a couple of weeks. Until then, stay safe.